Tonight's debate. I have a pretty simple role. I just get a chance to introduce some very important people. First, let me introduce our two questioners. I'd like to introduce Stephen Mishner. Stephen is the questioner representing the Northwest Connecticut Young Democrats. Welcome, Stephen. Stephen was born in Torrington, graduated from Torrington High. He's a member of the Democratic Committee in Torrington, and he also ran for the City Council in Torrington. He's the founder and owner of the Berkshire Planning Group, a public relations and a consulting firm. And Stephen lives right here in Torrington. I'd now like to introduce Nick Tomczyk. And Nick will be representing the Young Republicans. Welcome, Nick. Nick is a junior at Torrington High. He's involved in any number of activities in school and out of school. And maybe more important, he's interested in pursuing a degree in broadcast journalism. Nick lives in Torrington. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, John Kellogg. John's in his 15th year as the executive editor of the Republican American and the Sunday Republican. John's responsible for all news content in both the print and the line versions. Before coming to Connecticut, he served as the executive editor of The Sun in Lowell, Massachusetts. Also, he was the managing editor of the Portland Press Herald and the Maine Sunday Telegram, former bureau chief for the AP in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. John is a member of the New England Academy of Journalists and the winner of the Yankee Quill Award for the Lifetime Achievement. He's a well-known lecturer and a workshop leader on ethics and journalism. John and his wife live in Torrington. Welcome, John.
Good evening. Welcome to the Warner. We're glad you're here, and we look forward to a robust and thoughtful debate tonight. Let me take a minute to explain the rules. The debate will last 60 minutes. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. The questions will come from our two panelists and alternate between the candidates. They will each have 1 minute to answer. If the moderator feels time is needed, additional time is needed for a topic, he will instruct the timekeeper to extend the discussion. Coin toss before we came on stage determined that Andrew Roraback will go first with his opening remarks, and Elizabeth Esty will go last in the closing remarks. Questions will alternate from our panelists. Stephen will be asking the first question to Andrew Roraback, and Nick will be asking the second question to Elizabeth Esty. You should know that the candidates have agreed to call each other by their first names, Andrew and Elizabeth, to make it a little bit easier on the other folks on stage. Now, at some debates, the audience is admonished to be absolutely quiet. We think that that's unrealistic. What we do ask is that you not interrupt a candidate and that you keep your applause to a minimum, because it may end up denying your candidate time he or she needs to answer an important question. Mr. Roraback and Ms. Esty have each been working countless hours to earn the right to serve you in Congress. It's an all-consuming effort on their part, and they both deserve your attention and your respect. Andrew Roraback is the Republican nominee to my left. He has served 18 years in the Connecticut General Assembly, 6 years in the House of Representatives, and 12 years in the Senate. In those 18 years in Hartford, he has never missed a vote, casting 8,929 consecutive votes. There won't be time for him to recount those. He was born in Torrington and is the fourth generation to practice law in a firm started by his great-grandfather in 1883. He is the ranking member of the Environment Committee and has been a champion for farmland preservation and open space acquisition. He and his wife Carol live in Goshen and have a son, Andrew. Elizabeth Esty, to my far left, has been a community volunteer, an attorney, and an advocate for numerous causes. She started her public service as a volunteer for Planned Parenthood, and as a lawyer, she co-authored briefs defending women's reproductive rights in key Supreme Court cases. She served on the Cheshire Town Council for 2 terms and in the state legislature for 1 term. Among her accomplishments, she lists protecting tax credits for seniors, protecting local schools, and leading efforts to create green jobs in Connecticut. Elizabeth and her husband Dan live in Cheshire. They've been married 27 years and have 3 children, Sarah, Thomas, and Jonathan. So Stephen, your first question.
Opening.
Excuse me, you're right. Get myself censored here. Andrew?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight for what I am certain will be an exciting and informative debate in which we share dramatically different visions for America's future. For the last 18 years, the people of Northwest Connecticut have given me the privilege of serving them in the Connecticut General Assembly. I am a fiscally prudent, socially moderate legislator who has always had the courage to be independent and do what is right for the people I represent. I'm going to Congress not to seek bipartisan solutions, but to mold them, exactly as I've done over my entire legislative career. Who I have been is who I will be. What I have done is what I will do. And what I will do is bring people together to find solutions, to create the middle-class jobs the people of the 5th District so desperately need and want. Thank you so very much for being here. I look forward to this debate. Thank you.
Mrs. Esty.
Thank you to John Kellogg, the Republican American, Yukon Torrington, the Young Democrats and the Young Republicans for your hard work in organizing this debate and making it happen. And thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everyone here in this room tonight. I've spent my life working for the middle class, fighting for women's rights as an attorney, fighting for seniors as a member of my town council, and as a state representative, fighting for the workers who were laid off when Pratt & Whitney closed a plant in my hometown. Tonight, you will hear 2 very different visions of our country. My vision is of an America that gives the middle class a fair shot. My opponent will propose a very different vision, and if it sounds familiar, it's because it is. It is the same Republican talking points that we've heard in debates this fall, just recently, from Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, and Linda McMahon. The stakes are high for Central and Northwest Connecticut. Your decision in November matters. So thank you again for being here, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Stephen, your first question for Senator Roraback.
Sure. The Affordable Health Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, is sure to continue to be one of the most contentious issues facing Congress. Would you get rid of it entirely? Pieces of it? Which ones specifically? And what specifically would you do to replace it?
Stephen, the Affordable Care Act promises too much and will deliver too little. Unfortunately, this is a bill that will cost the American people $1 trillion over the next 10 years. And when it's fully implemented, leave 30 million Americans with no health care coverage whatsoever. This at a cost of $700 billion being taken from our Medicare system. Stephen, not only is this plan costing too much and delivering too little, it's going to have a real impact here in Northwest Connecticut. There's a medical device manufacturer called Becton Dickinson, which employs 300 people in Canaan, Connecticut. When I spoke with them today, they told me that this bill is going to cost them more than $50 million and threaten their plans to expand. A minute doesn't allow justice to give either Elizabeth or myself an adequate opportunity to answer the question, but I'll respect the time limits and look forward to perhaps having an additional question. Thank you.
I fully support the Affordable Care Act. We need to make health care more affordable and available for every American. It is a good start, because it ensures very important provisions. It prevents companies from denying coverage to individuals for pre-existing conditions. It ensures there can be no lifetime limits on coverage. It keeps our children insured up to age 26. I don't know a single young person between the ages of 19 and 26 who doesn't have coverage except through their parents' health care. And it makes sure that you have coverage that can never be taken away. Now, my opponent is using, if you recognize that's that $100 billion figure, it does sound familiar because it's what Mitt Ryan and Paul Romney and Linda McMahon have said, and it's frankly not true. The savings from Medicare come from stopping overpayments to insurance companies. That's exactly what we need to do if we're going to ensure affordable, quality health care for all Americans. It's a good first start.
We'll take another minute on this question. Mr. Roraback, the question is specifically, what would you do to replace the Affordable Health Care Act?
And let me share with all of you those elements of the bill that I support vehemently. I support allowing young people to stay on their parents' health program until they're 26. It's the law in the state of Connecticut. I voted for it here in Connecticut without hesitation. I support a requirement that insurance companies not be permitted to discriminate against people on the basis of pre-existing conditions. I support closing the donut hole. But my view is that we will be much better served as a nation if we charge the states with coming up with solutions to what's clearly a crisis. I think states are much better positioned to come up with a policy that serves everyone, that doesn't leave 30 million Americans without coverage, something that will be affordable. We can learn from the successes of states like Oregon and Massachusetts and the failures that those states have experienced as well. But with 50 laboratories, I think we can solve this problem in a way that will cost less, deliver more, and serve our nation long into the future.
Mrs. Esty.
Well, I think here you do see an important difference. Andrew proposes that we just leave it up to the states, and I will note that when Andrew had the opportunity to vote on Connecticut's healthcare reform supplement, Andrew voted against that healthcare reform. So that does raise into question how much he actually does support true healthcare reform. It's simply not possible, folks. We've seen this before. It's simply not possible to cherry pick all the things you like, and as somebody said the other day, have the candy and not have the spinach. It doesn't work. You can't have a program. And talk to anyone in the insurance industry, they'll tell you. It would be as if you could wait until after you had an accident, and then you bought car insurance and said, no, I want the cheap insurance that I could have gotten before I insured my car. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a program that covers everyone. You have to have mandates. All my opponent is suggesting is that we pass an unfunded mandate to require the states to do this on their own dime, rather than having a national program that ensures that everyone gets coverage.
Okay. Nicholas, your first question for Mrs. Esty.
All right. According to most studies, in 17 years, when I am 33, Social Security will be insolvent. Even though my generation will have contributed to the fund for a decade, what obligation do you feel to my generation to fix Social Security or replace it? If you want to scrap it, what would take its place?
It's a very important question. As the mother of a 17-year-old, 20-year-old, and 23-year-old, I certainly think about this myself quite a lot. I believe we need to keep in place Social Security. I am a strong advocate and believer that this program, which has been in place for decades, is the single most important program for ensuring a secure retirement for our senior citizens. It is absolutely essential, and it disproportionately affects women. Most women retire with very few benefits other than Social Security, so I see this also as a women's equality issue. In order to keep it secure, we need to, number one, stop Congress from raiding it. That is the real problem. Congress has raided the trust fund over and over again, and that is what I stood up against in the legislature, voting against budgets that raided the teachers' pension fund. Finally, there are things we can start with. And what we can start with is raising the cap, the income limit at which we contribute into the program. It's been done in the past, and that will go a long way to ensuring Social Security's promise of guaranteed benefit long into the future.
Mr. Roraback?
Thank you, Nicholas, for the question. First, let me make my position on Social Security and Medicare abundantly clear. I promised my mom and my dad that I wouldn't disturb the benefits that they have earned, and I won't lie to them, and I won't lie to seniors in this district. If I'm your congressman, I will not alter Social Security or Medicare benefits for anyone over the age of 50. For individuals under the age of 50, we have to make changes, Nicholas, or else there won't be anything there when you retire. Now, I'm disappointed that this debate has devolved into a place where, when I suggest that we should, and I agree with my opponent, with Elizabeth, we can raise the cap on where payroll taxes are imposed, but that only will solve 20 to 22% of the problem. The rest of the problem has to be solved by Republicans and Democrats shedding their partisan bickering and coming together to find solutions and talking with one another rather than talking by one another. And that's what I hope to bring to Washington, D.C.
Stephen, your question for Mr. Roraback?
Connecticut is awash in negative campaign ads, and this race is by no means exempt. The public decries this mudslinging, but it still persists. A news report that came out today has each of you spending $1 million in the closing weeks of the campaign on attack ads. So what ethical obligation do you, as candidates for the U.S. Congress, have to disavow ads about your opponent that are clearly misleading, if not downright inaccurate?
Well, is the question to me?
Yes.
I can't tell you how disappointed I was. The first ad that my campaign ran was a positive ad introducing me to the voters and telling them what I want to accomplish for them as a member of Congress. Right out of the box, my opponent's ad mischaracterized my positions on important issues of Medicare and Social Security. The press called it deceptive smears, blatant lies. And it's debased the debate where we can't talk about the real issue because the negativity has taken over. So I think we have an obligation to be truthful, and I think we have an obligation to stand behind what we put on the air. But when what's put on the air is intended to scare people, to win a political point by scaring people through misrepresenting the positions of our opponent, I think the voters deserve much better, and I was sorry that Elizabeth didn't choose to disavow that approach.
It's an excellent question, Stephen, and this is why I am such a strong advocate for robust campaign finance reform. This flood of money that was unleashed by the Citizens United decision is the biggest threat to American democracy that I have seen in my lifetime. We must stand up. It will not stop. What happens, there is no accountability. Andrew has no control, I believe, over the $1.1 million super PAC that arrived yesterday out of Ohio attacking me. It's gotten to be impossible to learn what candidates themselves stand for because other parties get involved. And that is why I'm committed to sponsoring legislation to overturn Citizens United, sponsoring legislation to make sure we have something like Connecticut's excellent public finance system, something I will note Andrew Roraback opposed when it was originally introduced in the state, although he has participated, as have I. I believe it is a very important system, and we need to restore accountability and decency and get people back focused on the issues. It cannot happen with the flood of money. It cannot happen unless we have a Supreme Court that is willing to allow Congress to put in place real limits on this flood of smears that we've seen this year.
I just want the record to be clear that I served on the committee which implemented the campaign finance reform laws, studied all the campaign finance reform laws, put together a proposal. And on the night before the legislature was to vote on that campaign finance reform bill, inserted into it was a loophole which turned the whole program upside down. I got on my feet and objected. The League of Women Voters joined me in objecting to this incredible perversion of a bill that was meant to do the right thing. The next year, we deleted that provision. I was proud to stand against a bill that was disingenuous and didn't do what it set out to do, despite all of the hard work we put into it.
I think we should go.
Go to the next question, all right. Nicholas, your question for Mrs. Esty.
Medicare has also become a political football. Do you support converting it to a voucher program to reduce its anticipated growth in the next 2 decades? If not a voucher, what changes would you seek to make?
This is a very important question, and as somebody who worked on Medicare policy over the course of about 20 years, I can assure you this is one of the most important questions we face. But it really is also part of a greater issue we have about properly dealing with healthcare in this country, or it's going to swallow up everything that we do. I stand strongly by Medicare's guarantee of benefits. It is the most effective program in lifting seniors out of poverty. It has been enormously important and effective. Now, that being said, there are things we can and should do to make Medicare sustainable for the long term. One of the biggest of those is allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices. Now, this is something that works in the private sector. Every private company does this, but Medicare has been denied the right to do this. If you know senior citizens like my mother or my father before his death, you will know that most of their health care costs actually for maintenance are prescription drugs. That didn't used to be the case, it is now. So if we're going to control the cost of Medicare, we absolutely need to have a system in place that allows negotiation over prescription drug prices. Thank you.
And I will repeat because it bears repeating. If you're 50 years of age or older, my commitment is the Medicare program that we now have in place will be there for you. You have earned it, you have paid for it, and you deserve the peace of mind of knowing that it will be there for you. If you're under 50, one of the places that I break with my party is on the wisdom of privatizing Medicare. I don't think that privatizing Medicare is the answer. And the reason I break with my party is because I am fearful that healthcare costs will rise at a pace which exceeds the capacity of the voucher to keep up with. So what we need to do is try to understand why it is we spend 3 times as much for a Medicare beneficiary in Miami, Florida, than we do for a Medicare beneficiary in Honolulu, Hawaii. There are many problems in the system that we need to address to keep it sustainable and affordable for all of us.
That, folks, is a nice idea, but it's not a plan. And if you're going to go to Congress, you better have an idea about important programs, what you're going to do. I would note that what Andrew has said now, and I note that it's convenient, we're both 53, and I think it is important that members of Congress, set it at 55 so it covers both of us so that we live under those terms. And I mean that seriously because these are important issues. These are important issues. We have to look at the incentives. One of the incentives, if you look at something like the Mayo Clinic, gets better results, costs less money, and treats sicker patients. So there are many things we can and need to do, and the Affordable Care Act is an important part of doing that. If we don't support Medicare, we are going to open up the donut hole. And again, Andrew is calling for the overturning of the Affordable Care Act. That will lead to the opening up of that prescription drug donut hole. And that, folks, is $6,400 per person per year. Most seniors I know, the ones I know, they don't have $6,400 lying around to fill that gap, and we still haven't heard a proposal for what is the alternative that actually works in the real world.
First of all, understand that the Affordable Care Act is going to, and the American Medical Association has come out against the IPAB, the IPAB. Why? Because they know that they're not going to be able to serve seniors on Medicare. If the president's health care plan, Elizabeth Esty's health care plan, is implemented, $400 billion is going to be reduced from reimbursements to hospitals and physicians. They are going to be very hard-pressed to continue to serve individuals now on Medicare. If reimbursement levels are reduced to a point where they can no longer afford to see seniors on Medicare, we have done ourselves no favors. So be very weary. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We can do better, and we should do better by the seniors in our country.
Stephen, your question for Mr. Roraback?
What is the one issue that is facing the United States on which you will not compromise?
Well, the issue on which I will not compromise is the responsibility that members of Congress have to be responsive first to the people that they represent. Party loyalty has its place, but in my judgment, party loyalty has begun to erode what has made this country great. I'm reading a book called The Parties versus the People, which was written by a former congressman named Mickey Edwards. And in it, he shows why it is that we need to be faithful to the people we represent. Because when we are not first faithful to those we work for, the nation's interests suffer. So my commitment is always to be faithful to the people I work for and never to bow to party pressure to do something that's not the right thing for the people I represent.
I believe that the obligation of an elected official is to do what he or she believes is in the best interest of their constituency and the country always, regardless of the personal price to them. I know a little bit something about this. I live in Cheshire, Connecticut, and when I was elected in 2008, after the Pettit murders, it was a big issue of contention in my district. But I was elected, I defeated a long-term incumbent, knowing my position on that. Well, a few months later, I was called to cast a vote on whether or not to seek the abolition of the death penalty. As somebody who's a lifelong opponent, somebody who had been the legal advisor to the statewide League of Women Voters year-long study, someone who had worked on 2 death penalty cases. I knew it didn't work in this state. I knew it was wrong. And I cast a vote that I knew probably would cost my seat. But when I cast that vote, and I was urged by many in leadership to not be there that day, don't cast your vote. But my view is this: I would not have the right to vote, nor would African Americans have the right to vote in this country if elected officials before them had been unwilling to pay a price by taking a difficult vote. And I give to you not only my promise, but my record on that point.
Nicholas, your question for Mr. Roraback?
The nation, and most certainly Washington, face an ideological divide. Both of you have presented yourself to voters as politicians willing to reach across the aisle, to compromise in the interest of the country. Can you give us specific examples of how you have compromised or crossed party lines in the past and how they might apply to the gridlock in Washington?
No, it's a very important question, and I think one of the areas you need to look to, I've represented a Republican town, so I never was able to run and did not run as a Democrat, but as somebody who was committed to helping the community. And you can see that in budgets that help seniors as well as funded schools. You can see that in my time in the legislature, where I broke with my party leadership on what is the most essential issue really for what government decides and what parties stand for, and that's on the budget, because I felt that the budget did not believe it was fiscally responsible. And if you're going to get people who serve this kind of role that you mentioned, you have to have them willing to break ranks, not on the easy things, but on the tough things. And I have worked across party lines on budgets where things really do matter. And I think to be effective in Congress as a junior member, you have to find points of agreement. And that's why I've spent so much time talking with folks about small business and manufacturing. These are very important to the middle class, very important to our district. And I think there's tremendous opportunity for us to make common cause, Democrats and Republicans across the country, to make good progress on small business, on manufacturing, and to get the middle class going in this country again. Thank you.
Mr. Roraback?
For the 18 years I've had the privilege of serving in Hartford, I have been in the minority each and every one of the years that I've been there. The only way I've been able to accomplish anything is by reaching across party lines. And I'm proud of what I've accomplished, whether it is in the form of coming to the aid of dairy farmers on the verge of extinction as milk prices fell, and Elizabeth Esty's budget would have taken away the $10 million that Senator Don Williams, a Democrat, and I worked so hard to protect the dairy farmers in Canaan. Look around you. The Warner Theater is the result of Republicans and Democrats working together to do what was right for the people of Torrington. The best way to get things done is to find common ground. I've been doing it for 18 years. It's what's desperately needed in Washington, D.C., and what I can't wait to bring to the halls of Congress.
Stephen, you have a question for Mr. Roraback? By the way, that should say son when we get to that point in my question.
Yeah, all right. So this is a personal question. So if elected, how would you, practically speaking, structure your life and your time? Senator Roraback, you're staring at kindergarten for your son, and Mrs. Esty, you have 3 children and a husband with a quite demanding job. So would you and your family move to Washington? And how much time would you spend in Washington, and how much would you spend here in the 5th District?
Stephen, my commitment to my family is to be with them as much as I can be. I will not move to Washington, D.C. I will remain a resident of Litchfield County, a place where I feel that I have had the privilege of getting to know this part of the country for a long time, so I will stay here. I am eager to participate in the incredibly important issues of the day that Congress is facing. But I also recognize that some of the most important work that any legislator does is in the district that he or she represents. In Hartford, I've been a constructive participant in state issues, but I've always remembered who I worked for, where I come from, and what matters to the people I represent. So as a member of Congress, you'll be seeing a lot of me here in Connecticut, because when Congress isn't at work, I will be at work here in the district.
Well, I have the benefit of having my last child graduating this spring, so that I will soon truly be an empty nester. The job of Congress right now is more than full-time to do it properly, and that's because there is so much that has not been done, frankly, in the last few years. Congress has hardly been in session, actually, in the last 2 years. And one of the real difficulties, and I know this is somebody who, when I was 20 years old, I worked on Capitol Hill, and it used to be that members of Congress knew each other. There was a culture of collegiality. And so I think in addition to the very important work of being in the district, I would not move to Washington. I would do what everyone else in Connecticut who serves does. They're down 2 or 3 or 4 days a week when Congress is in session. Otherwise, they're home with their families and their constituents. But I do think it's important to realize if members of Congress don't know each other, they're not going to trust each other. If they don't trust each other, they can't work together. And I do think we have a real problem right now of needing to create a culture, and it's related to fundraising again. That's part of the problem. To get members of Congress back focused on working for the American people, not for their own re-election.
Nicholas, you have the next question for Mrs. Esty.
Connecticut residents continue to pay some of the country's highest gasoline prices, and most homeowners here will be depending on expensive oil heat for the next 7 months. What can be done now to relieve that pressure, and what long-term strategy would you recommend to curb our dependence on foreign oil?
It's a really important question. As someone who drives a minivan a couple days a week, I can tell you, I know when it's 409 or 419. This affects everyone, whether you're a kid trying to put gas in your car to drive to soccer practice, whether you're trying to drive to your job, which you just got a job after 2 years of not having a job, and it's an hour away. So the gas prices are really important. I support Senator Blumenthal's efforts to curb the speculation in oil. This is a serious problem, and it's an example of what's happened when Wall Street was allowed to run wild, was allowed to let speculators spike the price of oil, and that is very important. But the real issue, at the end of the day, is we must have a real national energy policy of clean, affordable, sustainable energy. It is absolutely critical to our national security, it's critical to our economic development, and it is critical to saving the planet. So for that reason, I have a long record, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk more about energy policy because it is so terribly important. Thank you.
Connecticut has some of the highest gasoline and home heating oil prices in the nation. And in the legislature, over the past couple of years, Republicans have tried to do all that they can to wean the state of Connecticut from its insatiable appetite to squeeze revenue from Connecticut taxpayers. Sadly, the administration of Dan Malloy and the one-party rule in Hartford has fallen far short of the mark in delivering the kind of relief we could deliver if we wanted to be sensitive to middle-class families who have no choice but to fill up their cars with gas. Elizabeth is right. We need a national energy policy which frees us from reliance on foreign sources of supply. I think the Keystone Pipeline is something this country can't afford not to have. I oppose that pipeline. I opposed that pipeline when it ran over the biggest aquifer in our country. But now that the pipeline has been rerouted, it's an opportunity for a $7 billion job creation initiative which will create 4,000 jobs and give this country the peace of mind of having 500,000 barrels of oil flowing through our country should we need it in a time of crisis.
Mrs. Esty, question
This is incredibly important, and here is an area actually which I think I'd like to highlight because Andrew, I know, considers himself an environmentalist, and I certainly am very proud of the support I've received over the years from Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters and my endorsement in this race from the Sierra Club. But Andrew is supporting the Keystone Pipeline, and he's supporting that. He's accepted PAC money from ExxonMobil. I don't see how that lines up with the environmental concerns that have been raised about bringing the dirtiest source of oil there is. I don't know if any of you have ever seen video of what's involved with tar sands, but it's basically blasting off of the top of a mountain and pouring millions of gallons of fresh water in to extract and putting in chemicals and siphoning that off. It is an environmental disaster. It contributes to climate change. And the XL pipeline, as proposed, would come down through Texas and go through a duty-free port, which is designed to send that oil overseas. And there are already negotiations to sell that oil to Europe, to sell that oil to Latin America in long-term contracts. There is no guarantee that will do anything for American users of oil whatsoever, except to release greenhouse gases into the air, to spoil much of Canada, and risk the aquifers that are essential to the Midwest of the United States.
I too am proud to have been endorsed by the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters every time I have run for office. The environmental disaster is the coal ash that a company called NRG sits on in Montville, Connecticut, that's polluting the groundwater of citizens in the area. My opponent has chosen to solicit and accept campaign contributions from executives of that company who need the favor of her husband's agency to get out from under the pollution that they're causing. The Center for Responsive Politics has said Elizabeth Esty is wrong to be soliciting contributions from companies her husband's agency can either help or hurt.
Would you like 30 seconds?
Yes, I would. I proudly served on the Energy and Technology Committee. I've received contributions from 6,000 people around the state of Connecticut and across the country, and from leaders in the environmental community, from leaders in the energy community, and I'm proud of that support. My opponent, I know, has been accepting money as a state legislator with the entire business of the state of Connecticut before him. I've not made an issue of it. But Andrew, this is the 21st century. I am married. My husband also is in public service, and I would hope you would focus on my record and my achievements with a lifetime record, having worked for Natural Resource Defense Council, worked in the energy field.
Okay, next question. Stephen, for Mr. Roraback.
It's generally accepted that the rate of unemployment for younger Americans is considerably higher than the national average. What, if anything, should Congress be doing to improve employment opportunities for us young people?
Well, Congress should be doing a whole lot, Stephen. But the first thing Congress should be doing is not raising taxes at a moment when we need to recover economically. The truth of the matter is, Elizabeth Esty wants to raise taxes substantially on January 1st on the very community of people that are best positioned to give you and all other young people in this state job opportunities in the future. And those are the small business owners that represent 53% of the people that Elizabeth Esty wants to raise taxes on. A recent study by Ernst & Young has concluded that if Elizabeth Esty has her way, there will be 700,000 fewer job opportunities at a time when this nation and this district so desperately need more middle-class jobs. Raising taxes is not the answer. Look what has happened here in the state of Connecticut. We're 9% unemployment because Governor Malloy thought that imposing the biggest tax increase ever would lead us to economic recovery. It was wrong for him, and it's wrong for Elizabeth Esty.
Well, Stephen, one of the things we need to do is make sure that college is affordable. College education and higher education has always been the key to moving up in this country, and that's dangerously out of reach, as I'm sure you know right now. So under the Republican-led House of Representatives of the last 2 years, we saw efforts to cut Pell Grants, to cut Stafford loans, and these programs are vitally important to ensure that young people get the sort of education that they need. I would like to see us also having more in the way of apprenticeship and training programs, loan forgiveness programs in the areas where we do need skill sets, in what's called the STEM disciplines of science, technology, engineering, and math. We need to provide skills to our young people to compete globally in the 21st century. But I also need to just remark on this raising taxes business. You know, the study cited by Andrew, by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which recently endorsed him, and by every Republican who has taken this line, the answer they give is lower taxes on millionaires, lower taxes on capital gains, lower taxes on dividends, get rid of the estate tax, get rid of the alternative minimum tax. All of these programs to affect the very, very, very top. And you know what, folks? We've seen this before. This is trickle-down 2.0, and it doesn't work. It didn't work under Bush, and it will not work now, and that is why I oppose it.
telling them that there's Senator Roraback, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Stephen. And let me first say that I agree with Elizabeth that making sure that access to education is readily available to young people in this state is incredibly important. I would suggest you ask her why the budget she supported in Hartford would have likely closed the UConn-Torrington campus. Elizabeth Esty's budget said, let's close the UConn campus, which has the least use. I think that was code for let's close the Torrington campus. I've spent 18 years protecting and defending the UConn campus in Torrington because I know what it means to people who are unconventional students to have a place of higher learning here in Torrington. Now, I've said on the record that I wouldn't have supported the Ryan budget, and one of the reasons I wouldn't have supported the Ryan budget is because I don't support reducing access to Pell Grants. Pell Grants, and as you may know, Pell Grants, the Republican candidate for Congress is proposing that we make Pell Grants more readily available, and that's a view that I share.
Nicholas, your question for Mrs. Esty.
We thought we should offer you at least one question with a clear opportunity to reasonably agree or disagree. Mrs. Esty, you went to Harvard as an undergrad. Mr. Roraback, you went to Yale. Harvard remains unbeaten in football today. While the Elis are struggling at 1 win and 4 losses, who will win the game in Cambridge this year? And would you care to predict a final score?
I have to say, with the kind of schedule I've been keeping, I haven't not been keeping track of this very robust rivalry. But you know, I have to go with a politician's answer. Both teams will fight valiantly, and it may be like the year I remember when I was in college, in which MIT won the game because they disrupted the game with a big balloon that rose up in the middle of the field at halftime. So I put my money on MIT to win the game this year, playing some other prank that will disrupt both teams. American ingenuity at work.
Mr. Roraback?
Oh, there's no question that Yale is the perennial underdog, and for the past several years, we've come up short. But you know, I'm someone who believes the underdog can prevail. I'm a Republican running for Congress in Connecticut. And so, my prediction is underdogs will do well in 2 contests this year. In the contest to win the 5th district and in the game.
Stephen, you have a question for Senator Roraback?
Sure. This is a complex question on tax cuts. The rates that were established by the Bush tax cuts are set to expire on January 1st, which means that everybody's taxes could be increasing just as you take office. So would you support keeping tax cuts in some form? If so, should they be for everyone? Should they be for only the wealthiest taxpayers or for only the middle class? So for whichever category that you pick, please say how much, why, and how you would pay for that particular approach that you support.
Thank you. And is it my turn?
Yes, it is.
My approach is that we should not raise taxes on anyone on January 1st. We should keep the payroll deduction, and we should keep the rates now in effect. We should have a 1-year moratorium while we undertake a complete and comprehensive overhaul of the entire tax code, which is too convoluted, has too many loopholes, and is unfair to the American people. So for 1 year, let's keep current rates in effect. The Congressional Budget Office has said if we don't keep current rates in effect, unemployment in this country will go back up to 9%, and we're likely to have a double-dip recession. The way to avoid that is by keeping current rates in effect until we completely overhaul the entire tax code.
I believe we should extend the payroll tax forgiveness, and we should extend the Bush tax cuts on the middle class. But if you're going to be serious about deficits, if you're going to be serious about fiscal responsibility, you cannot do what is oh so popular for politicians to do, and that's what's been happening for the last 10 years, which is to increase spending as it was done over the last 10 years while simultaneously dropping revenue. It doesn't work. It's a math question. You cannot drop your revenue and raise your spending, and that has been going on without stop for 10 years. We need to get serious about our deficits, and we can't do it only off the spending side. You know, Andrew has said he would have a moratorium for a year, but then what gives with a deficit over that year? What is going to be cut? What is going to be cut in order to sustain those extended tax cuts on millionaires, which have not worked? So yes, I am opposed to going into a double-dip recession, but folks, we are going to have to get serious on both spending and on taxes. We cannot have all that we want and ask somebody else to pay for it. We've been doing it for too long, and we have to start getting serious now.
Mr. Roraback, did you want to respond?
I do. In 2009, Elizabeth Esty voted for a state budget which increased taxes on Connecticut's most successful residents by more than 30%. And at that time, we were told, if you do that, if you raise taxes on Connecticut's most successful residents, we will have a bright economic future. And guess what? Connecticut's economy continued in a downward spiral. And then Dan Malloy took over. And what did he say? Let's have the biggest tax increase ever. UConn reported last week that while other states' economies are beginning to recover, Connecticut's economy is still shrinking. Why? Because we can't tax our way to prosperity. Reducing spending must be the first order of business. It will not be easy. It will not be painless, but it must be done as job number one, both in Washington and in Hartford, if this economy is going to be sustainable in the long run.
If I may?
Yes, please.
If you've heard this, if this sounds familiar, you've heard it before. You heard it with Mitt Romney, you heard it with Paul Ryan, you heard it with Linda McMahon. We will preserve those tax cuts for everybody. Everybody loves tax cuts. But on the spending side, well, just trust us, it'll work out. What are the specifics? Just trust us, it'll work out. There will be so many jobs created, we won't have to worry about that. Not good enough. People deserve to know what your positions are. You know, Andrew talks a lot about the state of Connecticut and Dan Malloy, and perhaps you should run against Dan Malloy because you certainly talk a lot about him. But right now, what we're talking about is who to send from the 5th District of Connecticut to represent us in Washington, and how can they be as effective there. And right now, that choice for you is this. The first question is, who are you going to vote for Speaker? And if you agree with what Andrew has proposed, if you agree with Paul Ryan, then you should elect Andrew and have him vote for John Boehner and have him return Paul Ryan as the budget chair. But if you don't agree with that, then you should send me to Congress, because that is the first and most important choice either of us would make. Thank you.
Did I give you 2 bites at that apple? Yeah, I think so, okay. Nicholas, you have a question for Mrs. Esty.
Do you support the DREAM Act to allow the children of illegal immigrants to become citizens? Would you support a penalty-free way for illegal immigrants now in the country to obtain citizenship?
I do support the DREAM Act, and proudly so. We are a nation of immigrants. It is one of the wonderful things about this country. We have benefited so much by being a country that is the first choice destination of anyone who has a choice. And I am strongly committed to supporting the DREAM Act at the national level, because we've invested in these young people who have really basically spent their whole lives in this country. Now, we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. It is important that everyone follow the law, that we secure our borders, that we hold businesses accountable, and that people play by the rules and get on the back of the line and earn their way to citizenship and pay into the system. But I will note, you know, my opponent, Andrew, voted against the DREAM Act here in the state of Connecticut, and that is an clarification of his priorities on this, but I can tell you I'm a strong supporter of it. I think it is good for this country, and I think it is the right thing to do.
Elizabeth is right. I did vote against the DREAM Act in Connecticut. I invite any of you here or any of you watching at home to go online and search the transcript of the debate in the Senate, because it wasn't an easy decision for me, because I recognize these young people did nothing wrong themselves. They were brought here by their parents at young ages. But I also recognize that if we're going to give a spot at the University of Connecticut to someone who brought their children here in violation of our rule of law, that spot will be a spot not available to a law-abiding, tax-paying Connecticut family that has played by the rules with the expectation that our public universities would be available to meet their children's needs. What I said in the debate, and what I hold to today, is that we need comprehensive immigration reform to give these young people a more legitimate status in our society. Piecemeal efforts at the state level are a way to dodge the national debate. I'm ready to jump into the national debate to give these young people a status which will enable them to get a job when they graduate from college. Because today, when they graduate, they're still here as undocumented workers who won't be legally permitted to work in this country.
Stephen, a question for Mr. Roraback?
Sure. Now for a question on housing. Connecticut's home foreclosure rate shot up this month, and real estate values and the housing construction market continue to slump. Many have suggested that the Dodd-Frank banking and Wall Street reforms cannot work or won't be allowed to work. So what regulatory path do you favor to avoid these future banking and real estate calamities?
Well, the most important thing we need to do to revive our housing market is to revive our economy. Because when people have jobs, when people are working, that's what's going to bring back real estate values and home prices. Clearly, the excesses of Wall Street, which occurred in 2008, demanded a regulatory response. But the regulatory response has failed to the extent that JP Morgan still lost $2 billion in one trade. And small community-based banks throughout the 5th District, talk to your friendly neighborhood banker. Dodd-Frank is tying themselves up in knots when they did nothing wrong to cause the collapse in 2008. They are being smothered in regulations which are not going to make any of us safer here in the 5th District, but which burden our community banks so that they don't have more resources to contribute to the community and to loan to small business to get this economy going.
I agree on this question about small banks. It is a serious problem and we need to fix it. This is one of the reasons why I think there's such great opportunity for bipartisan cooperation around this issue in Washington. Our community banks, we're the backbone of our communities. Our credit unions currently are under pressure and having difficulty making loans to small businesses. This is one of the most important things we can do to get our economy going again, and we need to do it. But it also shows the failure of the banking system. The deregulation allowed Wall Street to run wild. We paid the price and they pocketed the money. We should have insisted that if they were going to take that TARP money, that they should have paid down the value of the bad mortgages. If that had been done, we could have set a floor under housing. People could have known that their house was worth what their mortgage was, and we could begin to rebuild. This is still a soft part of our economy. There's more work to be done, and I hope there'll be an opportunity in the next Congress to fix what was not fixed last time. Thank you.
Nicholas, you have a question for Mrs. Esty?
This year's budget deficit was announced Friday by the U.S. Treasury as $1.1 trillion. Everyone seems to agree that the United States cannot continue to spend beyond its means. Which specific programs can we reduce now or live without?
Short little question, 1 minute, right? Well, deficits do matter. And I've shown that time and again, having established a rainy day fund when I was on the town council, having fought for more responsible budgeting as a state legislator. But how and when we address the deficit really does matter, or we do risk doing what's happened in England, where they clamped down on spending too fast and have thrown themselves into another recession. So we need to be careful about what we do. We need to address, as I said earlier, both sides of the equation. That's just the reality. We're going to have to address both spending and we're going to have to address revenue. That is why I believe we not only can afford to, but we need to let the temporary Bush tax cuts expire at the upper end, which is doing very well. If you hadn't noticed, if you haven't read, the upper end, the very tippity top is doing very well. We need to get to the business of paying down our debt, but we also need to invest in what will make this country great going forward. We need infrastructure investments, we need an information highway, and if we don't invest as a country, we will not create the long-term value that is needed for jobs of the 21st century. So again, these are hard problems, but the way we balance it matters greatly, and the paths forward by the two parties are really very different.
Thank you. And I think Elizabeth speaks from firsthand experience how well the upper echelon is doing. This is an individual who has given $1.5 million of her own money to finance these ads which distort my record. This is an individual deriving tens of thousands of dollars in income from a factory she owns that she hasn't visited in 20 years and which recently laid off 50 of its employees. But to answer your question, the way we reduce spending is by leading by example. As a member of Congress, I'm prepared to cut my own pay because I'm not going to ask the American people to endure hardships if I'm not prepared to endure hardships myself. That's what I did as a state legislator. I voluntarily reduced my own pay. There are many recommendations in the Simpson-Bowles Commission which are gathering dust and which should be easy to implement to reduce spending. But the easy stuff has been made hard by the hyper-partisanship in Washington, D.C. And if we can't get the easy stuff done, how are we ever going to get to the hard stuff?
We're actually down to closing time. I could reduce the time for your closing statements to a minute, or you could...
Well, if I could just say, I had hoped we'd talk about issues. I'll talk about issues as I have tonight. Having briefly looked at Andrew's finance report, I do not think he is in a position to have curl the accusations towards at me.
Mr. Roraback, your closing statement?
Thank you all. I told you at the beginning of this debate that you would hear two starkly different visions for America's future, and I think you have. Yesterday I toured a factory in New Britain, and at the end of the tour, the plant manager gave me this. It's a tape measure made in New Britain, Connecticut. And the plant manager said to me, Andrew, I want you to use this to measure your success as a member of Congress. And I said to him, the measure of my success will be the success of your factory in New Britain. If, as a member of Congress, I can promote policies which result in more people working here, in more middle-class job opportunities, then I will have succeeded. If I can participate in adopting an energy plan which reduces gasoline prices and home heating oil prices, I will have succeeded. If I can participate in strengthening access to higher education, I will have succeeded. My success over 18 years serving in Hartford has been predicated on building relationships, because building relationships is what has enabled me to serve. I will have relationships with Democratic members of Congress, as I've had relationships with Democratic state legislators. Name-calling advances the interests of no one. Through the strength of those relationships, I will work to find solutions to problems which we can't afford to wait to solve. Give me the opportunity to serve you, and I will make you proud. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your attention to such an important race for Connecticut's future. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Esty.
Thank you. As you've seen here tonight, you do have a very clear choice this November to bring some common sense and practical problem solving to Washington, or to repeat failed policies using the political rhetoric and attacks we've heard from Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Speaker Boehner, and Andrew. They're selling more tax breaks to millionaires, repealing healthcare reform, drilling for more oil, and changing the guaranteed benefits of Medicare and Social Security, all at the expense of the middle class. As you make your decision, you're likely to hear more personal attacks. We heard them tonight from my opponent and from his super PAC. But what's really important in this race is our very different visions of America and our priorities for moving this country forward. I feel even more strongly about that today. Washington must get back to the business of focusing on the needs of the American people. I'm running for Congress because our families need jobs. Our small businesses need loans. Our manufacturers need a level playing field. And our seniors need Medicare and Social Security to be there when they need it. The challenges we face are big, but the solutions are there if we work hard and if we work together. We've done that before. Our country was built by people who worked hard and didn't take no for an answer. I have a record of service in my community, almost 2 decades of trying to help things get better for Connecticut communities and families. I've served at the local level where you have to balance the budget, and where we paid down debt and established a rainy day fund. I know about taking on tough challenges and beating the odds through persistence and hard work. And I want to take that lifetime of experience as a mom, an attorney, a community leader to Washington to break the gridlock and get things done. I ask for your support and your vote in November. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our debate for this evening. For the press corps traveling with the candidates, they will be available in the atrium room on the balcony level of the theater in about 10 minutes to answer any additional questions that you may have. On behalf of the Warner Theater, the University of Connecticut, the Republican American would like to thank you for taking the time to come out tonight and to remind you that one of your most precious rights and obligations in a free society is to cast your vote on November 6th. Thank you and safe drive home.